The gavel slammed down, echoing through the courtroom. The air felt heavy. Every pair of eyes locked onto the 12-year-old boy standing alone at the defense table. Marcus Jackson didn't flinch. The judge adjusted his glasses, leaning forward with a smirk. "Young man, I'll give you one last chance. Plead guilty and maybe, just maybe, I'll be lenient." Muffled whispers rippled through the audience. The prosecutor folded his arms, glancing at the clock as if this was already decided. The cops who arrested Marcus sat in the front row, their expressions unreadable. They thought they had already won. Marcus finally spoke, his voice clear, calm, but sharp as a blade. "No, Your Honor, I won't plead guilty, because I didn't do it, and I can prove it." The smirk disappeared from the judge's face. The prosecutor's confidence wavered. Because they all knew something was wrong. Marcus wasn't just defending himself. He was about to flip the entire courtroom upside down. They framed him, but they picked the wrong kid. How did a 12-year-old get here? And how is he about to take down an entire system? Keep watching, because the truth is about to change everything. Marcus Jackson had always been different. While other kids were outside playing, he was in the library, buried in law books. Not because anyone made him, but because he was fascinated by the way rules controlled the world. By the way some people used them as a shield, and others as a weapon. He memorized courtroom procedures the way kids memorized video game cheat codes. He could recite the Constitution better than his teachers. His mother, Diane, used to joke, "One day, my boy's gonna be a lawyer." She never thought he'd have to defend himself at 12 years old. It happened fast. Too fast. Marcus had been at the city library flipping through a book on constitutional law when 2 officers stormed in. Their eyes scanned the room, then landed on him. "You," one of them said. "Stand up." Marcus blinked. "Me?" Before he could react, they grabbed his arms and yanked him up. "Wait, what's going on?" "Suspect fits the description of a robbery suspect," the officer muttered. "A black kid. A hoodie." That was the description. No evidence, no investigation, just cuffs. They dragged him outside, past dozens of stunned onlookers. Someone pulled out a phone, recording the whole thing. But viral videos didn't stop corrupt cops. His mother screamed when she saw him. She ran up, demanding answers, but the officers pushed her back. "Ma'am, your son is under arrest for robbery," one of them said. "You can come down to the station." "Robbery?" Diane's voice cracked. "Marcus was at the library. He's been here for hours." They ignored her. They always ignored mothers like her. The case against Marcus was flimsy at best, flat-out fake at worst. A blurry security video showed a figure in a hoodie running from a gas station. A witness statement claimed, "I think it was a young black kid." The store's register was missing less than $50. That was it. That was enough to put a 12-year-old in a courtroom, fighting for his future. Judge Richard Wallace had a reputation. He didn't believe in second chances, especially not for kids like Marcus. A strict, no-nonsense judge who handed out the harshest sentences possible. Kids barely older than Marcus had left his courtroom in shackles, their lives ruined before they had a chance to begin. Now, he was looking down at Marcus like he was already guilty. "You understand the charges against you, boy?" he asked, his voice cold. Marcus swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor." His mother tried to speak. "Please, my son is—" The judge raised his hand, silencing her. He turned back to Marcus. "You're looking at juvenile detention until you're 18, he said, "or longer, if we transfer you to adult court." Marcus's stomach dropped. 18. That was 6 years of his life. Gone. And he didn't even do anything. His public defender barely looked at him. A tired man with too many cases and not enough time, he leaned down and whispered, "Just take the plea deal, kid. They'll go easy on you." Marcus clenched his fists. Plea deal? That meant admitting he did something he didn't do. That meant giving up. He looked up at his mother. Her eyes were red, her hands shaking. He couldn't let this happen. He wouldn't let this happen. Marcus took a deep breath. I want to represent myself. The courtroom went silent. The judge's eyebrows shot up. The prosecutor smirked like Marcus had just said something ridiculous. His public defender blinked. Kid, that's not... I know the law, Marcus said, and I know I didn't do this. The judge leaned forward, staring at Marcus like he was a bug under a microscope. Then, slowly, he grinned. You think you can win against me, boy? Marcus held his gaze. I know I can. The judge laughed. The prosecutor laughed. The officers in the front row chuckled under their breath. They thought this was a joke. They had no idea what was coming. The night had been quiet. Marcus sat in the farthest corner of the city library, his fingers gliding over the pages of a thick book on constitutional law. He had read it before, more than once, but something about it fascinated him. The way laws were written, the loopholes people missed, the power they held when used the right way. Outside, the streetlights flickered. The library was nearly empty, just a librarian at the front desk and a few students scattered at the tables. Then the doors burst open. 2 cops stormed in. Their eyes locked onto Marcus immediately, scanning the room like they were hunting something. Or someone. You! One of them barked. Stand up! Marcus frowned, glancing around. There was no one else nearby. He tapped his own chest. Me? Now. Confused, he closed his book and got to his feet. What's going on? Before he could blink, rough hands grabbed his arms. Cold metal clamped around his wrists. Cuffs. Wait! The librarian rushed forward. What's happening? Suspect fits the description, one officer muttered, dragging Marcus toward the exit. What description? Marcus's heart pounded. I didn't do anything. The other cop barely looked at him. Tell it to the judge, kid. Outside, red and blue lights flashed, reflecting off the wet pavement. A police cruiser idled at the curb, its engine humming. Marcus twisted against their grip. Call my mom. You can't just... A radio beeped. Unit 14, suspect in custody, a voice crackled. We'll process him now. They shoved him into the back seat. The door slammed shut. His breath came fast, his mind spinning. What just happened? At the station, things got worse. A detective with tired eyes sat across from Marcus in a cold, windowless room. The more you cooperate, the easier this will be, he said, shuffling some papers. You were seen running from the gas station robbery. Why'd you do it? Marcus stared at him. I was at the library. The detective didn't blink. That's not what the tape says. He slid a laptop across the table and pressed play. Marcus leaned forward, watching the grainy black and white footage. A hooded figure sprinted past a gas station, vanishing into the shadows. The timestamp in the corner read 8:40 p.m. Marcus frowned. That's not me. The detective sighed. We have an eyewitness who says otherwise. Marcus clenched his fists. Someone was lying. In court, the prosecutor, Callahan, made his move. Your Honor, this footage places the defendant near the crime scene, he said, pointing at the screen, moments after the register was emptied. Marcus folded his arms. It's too blurry to even see a face. Callahan ignored him. He turned toward the jury, pacing slowly. And let's not forget, the witness. A man stood up from the back row, stepping forward hesitantly. Marcus narrowed his eyes. He had never seen this guy before. State your name, Callahan said. Robert Ellis, the man mumbled. Callahan nodded. And where were you the night of the robbery? I was across the street, Ellis said, rubbing his hands together. I saw him run out. I'm sure of it. Marcus's stomach twisted. Lies. You're sure? Callahan pressed. Ellis nodded. Yeah. Something wasn't right. Marcus studied the man's shaking hands, the way he kept avoiding eye contact. He was nervous, not because he was in court, but because he was lying. And then Marcus saw it. A folded bill peeking from the man's pocket. He was paid off. Marcus's jaw clenched. This wasn't just a bad case. This was a setup. If he didn't fight back, his life was over before it even started. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the so-called witness took his seat again, wiping sweat from his brow. Marcus knew the man had been paid off. He just had to prove it. But that wouldn't happen if he let someone else fight this case for him. The public defender assigned to him barely looked up from his messy stack of papers. The man had been juggling too many cases, too little time, and Marcus could already tell he wasn't going to fight. He was going to plead out, just like they wanted. "Listen, kid," the defender muttered, finally glancing at him. "They have footage. They have a witness. Your best option is to take a deal. Plead guilty, maybe get out in a couple of years." Marcus's stomach turned to stone. A couple of years? He was 12. He gritted his teeth. No. The lawyer sighed like this was just another case on a long list of kids thrown into the system. "It's the best move. This judge, he's not going to go easy on you. And Callahan, he wins 90% of his cases." Marcus's fingers curled into fists under the table. This wasn't about justice. They weren't trying to figure out the truth. They were trying to get rid of him as fast as possible. And if he didn't fight, they would. He stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to represent myself." The room fell silent. Judge Wallace blinked. Then he chuckled, shaking his head like he'd misheard. "Excuse me." Marcus held his ground. "I want to represent myself." Laughter rippled through the courtroom. A couple of jurors smirked, the prosecutor grinned, and even his own lawyer scoffed. "You're a kid," Judge Wallace said, adjusting his glasses. "You don't even understand how a trial works." Marcus tilted his head. "The Sixth Amendment gives me the right to represent myself, unless you're denying me that right." The judge's smile faltered for a second before he caught himself. He folded his hands, watching Marcus like he was some bug under a microscope. "You really think you can do better than a real lawyer?" Marcus didn't blink. "I know I can." Callahan, the prosecutor, couldn't hold back his amusement. He let out a short laugh and shook his head. "This is a waste of the court's time. The kid is 12. He has no training, no degree, no bias," Marcus cut in. "Unlike you." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Callahan's jaw clenched. Judge Wallace leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the desk. His eyes glimmered with amusement, like he had just been handed a personal challenge. "Fine," the judge said. "You want to embarrass yourself? Go ahead, I'll allow it." Marcus heard a chuckle from the jury box. A kid lawyer? This was entertainment to them, but they had no idea what was coming. They framed him, but they picked the wrong kid. The game had begun, and Marcus was already 2 steps ahead. Marcus took a slow breath, steadying himself. The judge thought this was a joke. The prosecutor thought this was a waste of time. The jury saw him as just a kid trying to play lawyer. That was fine. Let them underestimate him. He stepped forward. "I'd like to call Officer Grant to the stand." The officer who arrested him stood, his uniform crisp, his jaw tight as he made his way to the witness chair. He moved with the confidence of a man who had done this 1,000 times before, who had arrested so many kids like Marcus that he had stopped seeing them as people. Grant took his seat. Marcus locked eyes with him. "Officer, can you confirm that you were the one who arrested me?" "Yes," Grant said. "And can you explain why?" Grant straightened in his seat. "You matched the description of a suspect who was seen fleeing the scene of a robbery." Marcus nodded, pretending to scribble something on his legal pad, even though he didn't need notes. "You wrote the arrest report, correct?" "That's right." Marcus looked up. "So you personally saw me at the crime scene?" Grant hesitated. "No, but..." Marcus lifted a copy of the police report in his hand. Then why does it say here that I was identified at the scene? The officer's face twitched. Is that a mistake? Marcus pressed. Grant shifted in his seat. It was a miswording. A miswording, Marcus repeated. He turned to the jury, letting that word sink in. Then he slid the paper onto the judge's desk. In your statement, you claimed that a witness identified me. But earlier, you said I was arrested because I fit the description. Which one is it? Grant's mouth opened, then closed. The silence stretched. The jury was watching closely now. Callahan, the prosecutor, sat forward, his smirk disappearing. Marcus let the moment drag out before moving in for the kill. You said I matched the description of the suspect. Can you repeat that description for the court? Grant glanced at Callahan as if looking for an out. Go ahead, Marcus said. What was the description? The officer cleared his throat. The suspect was a young black male in a hoodie. Marcus tilted his head. That's it? That's it. A murmur spread through the room. Marcus turned to the judge. So, to be clear, any black kid in a hoodie could have been arrested that night. Objection, Callahan snapped. The witness identified him. Marcus turned instantly. Right, let's talk about that witness. He pointed toward Robert Ellis, the man who had shakily testified earlier. I'd like to call Mr. Ellis back to the stand. The man hesitated before standing up and shuffling forward. His hands fidgeted as he sat down. Marcus approached slowly. You said you saw me running from the store. Ellis nodded. Yeah. You're sure? Another nod. Marcus exhaled like he was thinking. You were across the street, correct? Ellis nodded again. How far away would you say that was? Ellis hesitated. Maybe 50 feet. Marcus turned toward the screen where the security footage had been played earlier. And it was dark, wasn't it? Ellis glanced at Callahan, who was suddenly watching stiffly. Yeah, I guess. Marcus paced slightly. So, just to clarify, you saw, from 50 feet away, in the dark, through a store window, a boy in a blurry hoodie, and you're certain that boy was me. Ellis swallowed. Callahan shifted in his seat. The jury was listening now. Marcus took a deep breath. You're under oath, sir. Ellis's leg bounced under the table, his fingers twisted together. And then Marcus saw it again, that folded bill in his pocket. Marcus stepped forward, lowering his voice just enough that the tension in the room thickened. Did someone pay you to say you saw me? Ellis's head snapped up. What? You heard me, Marcus said, his tone cold now. Did someone pay you to say it was me? No. You hesitated. Ellis's breathing quickened. Your hands are shaking. You're sweating. You're looking at Callahan every time you answer. Why? Callahan shot up. Objection. Marcus didn't stop. Where did you get the money in your pocket, Mr. Ellis? Ellis froze. His eyes darted toward Callahan again, but the prosecutor was no longer smirking. Tell the truth, Marcus said, his voice sharp. Or should we get a handwriting expert to compare your statement to Callahan's? Ellis's lips parted, then closed. His hands balled into fists. And then, finally, he broke. I was paid, he mumbled. The courtroom exploded. The judge banged his gavel. Callahan's face drained of color. Marcus stood tall. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was exposing something much bigger. The courtroom was chaos. The moment Robert Ellis admitted he had been paid off, the jury erupted in murmurs. The judge pounded his gavel, and Callahan looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Marcus didn't move. He had them on the ropes, but he wasn't finished. Your Honor, he said, his voice cutting through the noise, I request the body cam footage from Officer Grant's arrest of me. The room stilled. Judge Wallace adjusted his glasses, looking down at Marcus like he had just crossed a line. "What exactly are you looking for?" Marcus didn't blink. "The truth." A tense silence followed. Judge Wallace let out a slow breath. "Prosecutor Callahan, does the prosecution have the body cam footage from the arrest?" Callahan stiffened. His jaw tensed, his hands gripping the table. "Your Honor," Callahan said, "there is no body cam footage available." Marcus's stomach dropped. No footage. He expected them to hide something, but to erase it completely? "Why not?" Marcus pressed. Callahan straightened his tie. "There was a technical issue. The footage was corrupted." "Corrupted," Marcus repeated. He turned to the jury. "How convenient." Judge Wallace shot him a warning look. "Careful, son." Marcus kept his face blank, but inside his mind was racing. They erased the footage. Not because it was useless, because it proved his innocence. He could feel the weight of Judge Wallace's gaze on him. The judge wasn't just annoyed now, he was tense, uncomfortable, like he wanted this trial over as soon as possible, which meant only one thing. He was part of this. Marcus turned back to Callahan. "What about Officer Grant's history?" The prosecutor frowned. "What about it?" Marcus reached into his folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "I did some reading," Marcus said. "Did you know Officer Grant has been involved in multiple wrongful arrests?" Callahan's face darkened. "I object." Marcus held up the file. "5 cases in the last 2 years," he continued, his voice rising. "All dismissed due to lack of evidence. In one case, the suspect had an alibi. In another, witnesses recanted. And, in one particularly disturbing case, an entire security camera system malfunctioned." He let that last part hang in the air. The jury was locked in now. Judge Wallace shifted in his chair. "That's enough, young man." Marcus turned, his heart hammering. "Is it? Because it sounds to me like Officer Grant has a history of making people look guilty when they're not." Grant's face reddened. Callahan's hands balled into fists. Marcus took a slow breath, pacing toward the jury. "Let's talk about me for a second. If I was robbing a store at 8:40 p.m., how could I be at the city library at the same time?" Silence. Marcus pulled out a printed receipt from his folder. "This is my checkout record from the library," he said. "It shows that I checked out a book at 8:42 p.m. He turned, holding it up. "This receipt is time-stamped. That means it's irrefutable proof that I was nowhere near that robbery." Callahan's face twisted. The jury members leaned in. One of them whispered something to another. Judge Wallace rubbed his temples. "Objection," Callahan snapped, his voice shaking. This doesn't prove anything. He could have gotten someone else to check out the book for him." Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "Really? That's the best you've got?" The jury laughed under their breath. Even Judge Wallace looked irritated now, not at Marcus, but at Callahan. The case was falling apart. But Marcus wasn't done, because there was one last thing left to say. He turned to face the judge. "Your Honor," he said slowly, "I'd like to ask you a question." Judge Wallace's jaw tightened. "Careful, son." Marcus took a step forward. "Why is it that every time I prove I'm innocent, you seem more and more annoyed?" A thick silence settled over the courtroom. The judge didn't respond. Callahan's breathing turned sharp. The jury was watching everything now. Marcus had just exposed something bigger than this trial, and he had the sickening feeling that if he kept pushing, he might not make it out of this courtroom. Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the ceiling. The weight of everything that had happened in court pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. He had destroyed the prosecution's case, ripped apart their so-called evidence, and exposed a corrupt officer in front of everyone. But somehow, he knew it wasn't over. His mom had been quiet on the ride home. Too quiet. Usually she'd hug him after something stressful, tell him how proud she was. But tonight, she just locked the doors behind them and kept checking the windows. Something was wrong. Marcus sat up. "Mom?" No answer. He walked down the hall, peeking into the kitchen. His mom stood near the sink, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles were white. "Mom, what's—" She turned around so fast he took a step back. Her face was pale, shaken. "Marcus," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady, "we need to talk." She motioned him to sit at the table. Marcus hesitated. "What happened?" She exhaled. "I just got a call." Marcus's stomach tightened. "From who?" She looked at the floor. They didn't say their name, just a voice. A man. A chill ran through him. What did he say? Her lips pressed into a thin line. He said, "Drop the case or you'll regret it." Silence. Marcus's chest tightened. "What?" "He said we've pushed too far, and if we don't back off, something bad is going to happen." Marcus gritted his teeth. This wasn't just a case anymore. They were trying to scare them. He shook his head. "We're not dropping it." His mom's hands trembled as she reached for him. "Marcus, please. You already proved you're innocent. Let the court deal with the rest." Marcus clenched his fists. "No, I didn't." She froze. "I proved they were lying," he said. "I proved they faked evidence. But did they admit it? Number, did anyone apologize? Number, that means they're still going to try and make this disappear." His mother's voice cracked. "They're threatening us, baby." Marcus looked her in the eye. "That means I'm winning." Boom. A loud crash from the front of the house. Both of them jumped. "What was that?" his mom whispered. Marcus moved fast. He rushed toward the living room, heart pounding, eyes scanning the darkness outside the window. Then he saw it. A shadow at the door. A figure dressed in dark clothing moving quickly. Someone was breaking in. His mother grabbed his arm. "Marcus, get back!" His pulse thundered in his ears. The door handle jiggled. Whoever it was, they were not here to talk. His mom fumbled with her phone. "I'm calling the police." The front door shook again. This time, harder. Marcus's mind raced. If they were part of the same people who framed him, calling the cops might not even help. The only thing stopping this intruder was the deadbolt. Then, silence. A few seconds passed. Marcus held his breath. His mom gripped his arm, her hand ice cold. Then, footsteps. Moving away. Then, nothing. Gone. Marcus let out the breath he'd been holding. His mom was still shaking, clutching the phone. The police came 20 minutes later. 2 officers walked through the house, checked the locks, shined flashlights across the porch. "Looks like an attempted break-in," one of them muttered. Marcus sat on the couch, silent. This wasn't random. This was a warning. When the officers left, his mom locked the door twice. "You're staying home tomorrow," she whispered. "No court, no school. Just stay here where it's safe." Marcus met her eyes. No. His mother's face twisted with fear. "Marcus." "They want me to stop," he said. "That means I'm close to something." She grabbed his hands. "You are 12 years old. This is bigger than you." Marcus shook his head. "No, it's not." He stood up. "They framed me. They erased my body cam footage, and now they're trying to scare me into running." His voice hardened. "I won't run." His mom's eyes filled with fear, but also something else, a flicker of pride. She exhaled shakily and nodded. Marcus turned toward his room, his jaw clenched. The real criminals were getting desperate. Tomorrow he was going back to court, and this time he wasn't just playing defense. He was going to end them. The courtroom felt different today. Tense. charged, like everyone could sense something big was about to happen. Marcus walked in with his shoulders squared, his expression calm, but inside, he was ready for war. His mother sat in the front row, gripping the edge of her seat, eyes filled with worry. She wanted him to walk away, to stay safe, but safety didn't exist when the system wanted you buried. This wasn't just about his freedom anymore. It was about justice. Judge Wallace adjusted his glasses, looking even more impatient than usual. Let's get this over with. Defense, you may present your final evidence. Marcus stood tall. I have a recording, he said. Callahan froze. A what? The prosecutor scoffed, but his voice had a slight crack to it. A recording, Marcus repeated, from the night I was arrested. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Marcus continued, locking eyes with Officer Grant, the cop who had arrested him. When I was put in the police car, I had my phone in my hoodie pocket. I pressed record. The room went dead silent. Even Judge Wallace, who had spent the entire trial looking like he wanted to get this over with, sat up straighter. Callahan's face drained of color. Your Honor, this is highly improper. Let the boy speak, Judge Wallace snapped. Callahan clamped his jaw shut. Marcus pulled out his phone. This is a voice recording of Officer Grant speaking with another officer, right after I was arrested, before anyone even looked at evidence. He pressed play, static, then voices. Officer 1. You sure about this? The kid doesn't even match the height they gave us. Officer 2, Grant. Doesn't matter. We need a suspect. Officer 1. But, Grant, you want to lose your badge? The orders came from above. Just book him and move on. The courtroom exploded. Gasps, murmurs. Someone cursed under their breath. Marcus paused the audio. Let it sink in. He turned to the jury, letting them see the truth. They didn't care who did it, he said. They just needed someone to blame. Callahan jumped up. Objection! This recording is inadmissible. It could be doctored. Marcus tilted his head. Then let's bring in an expert to verify it, unless you're scared of what they'll find. More murmurs from the jury. Judge Wallace rubbed his temples, his face noticeably pale now. Marcus wasn't sure why until he saw it. The judge wasn't just angry, he was nervous. Because he had known all along. That was it. The missing piece. Marcus pushed harder. Your Honor, he said, his voice firm. Officer Grant arrested me before looking at the evidence. He erased body cam footage. He lied under oath. And now we have proof that he did it on orders from someone higher up. The judge leaned forward. And who, exactly, do you think gave those orders? Marcus's pulse pounded. Callahan sat unnaturally still. Officer Grant wouldn't look up. The whole courtroom was watching. Marcus swallowed. If you don't know, he said slowly, then why do you look so nervous? Judge Wallace's face twitched. His fingers drummed on the desk. Then he turned to Callahan. Prosecutor, do you have any response? Callahan looked trapped. He licked his lips, reaching for his briefcase like he was looking for a way out. Then the back doors of the courtroom burst open. A uniformed officer rushed in, holding a file in his hand. Your Honor, he called out of breath. New evidence has come to light. Judge Wallace looked furious. What evidence? The officer stepped forward, handing over a folder. Wallace flipped through it. His face drained of color. Marcus strained to see what was inside. The judge slammed the folder shut. He took a deep breath, then looked at Callahan. Mr. Callahan, he said, his voice cold, would you like to explain why the real suspect was just arrested an hour ago, and why he confessed to everything? The entire room froze. Marcus's stomach flipped. Callahan shot to his feet. I don't know anything about this. Judge Wallace's gavel came down like a hammer. "You lied to this court," he thundered. "You knowingly prosecuted an innocent child." Callahan stammered, sweating now. I was given the case." "By who?" Marcus cut in. Callahan swallowed hard. The prosecutor turned to the judge, and for the first time, Wallace looked away. That was it. That was the real truth. This wasn't just about Callahan. It went higher, and Wallace knew exactly who. But before anything else could happen, Wallace slammed his gavel. "Court is adjourned." The officers in the room stood up, already moving toward Callahan. The jury members whispered among themselves. The reporters at the back were typing frantically. Marcus sat down, breathing heavy. It was over. Or, at least this part was. The headlines hit within hours. 12-year-old boy exposes massive police corruption in court. Prosecutor Callahan and Judge Wallace under investigation. System rigged against innocent kids until one genius fought back. News stations ran clips of Marcus grilling the officer, playing the secret recording and forcing Callahan into a corner. It was everywhere, on TV, social media, newspapers. Marcus Jackson had won. But somehow, he didn't feel like celebrating. The real burglars had been arrested that same afternoon. 2 men in their 20s, caught on security footage that had conveniently been lost during his trial. They confessed immediately, admitting Marcus had nothing to do with it, which meant everyone in that courtroom knew he was innocent from the start. Yet they still tried to bury him. Marcus sat on his couch, scrolling through the news, his mother watching over his shoulder. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. It had been 2 days since the trial ended, and yet Marcus still felt like someone was watching. His mom sighed, rubbing her temples. "You did it, baby. You proved them wrong." Marcus nodded, but his mind was somewhere else. Callahan had been removed from his position immediately. His career, over. Judge Wallace had stepped down from the bench just hours after court adjourned. No reason given, just gone. Too easy. Marcus clenched his jaw. "They're hiding something." His mom frowned. "Who?" Marcus turned his phone toward her, scrolling past the news about Callahan's resignation. "This isn't just about one bad prosecutor, or a crooked cop, or a biased judge," he said. "Someone gave the order to frame me." His mom's breath hitched. "Marcus!" "I don't think Callahan was even the one pulling the strings," Marcus muttered. "And Judge Wallace?" He left too fast. He knew something was coming. His mom's hands shook as she reached for him. "Baby, you won. You got your life back." Marcus stared at her. "Did I?" She blinked. Marcus looked back at his phone. "They tried to destroy me, and now they're just walking away?" The truth settled in his chest like a stone. This wasn't justice. This was a cover-up. Something bigger was at play. And if they were willing to frame an innocent kid once, they'd do it again. He turned off his phone, staring at the dark screen. This wasn't over. Not even close. Marcus sat alone in his room, the glow of his phone screen lighting up his face. He had spent hours scrolling through news reports, watching footage of himself tearing apart Callahan's case, exposing the truth. The world was calling him a hero. But heroes weren't supposed to feel like this. He should have been relieved. He should have felt safe. But he didn't. A notification popped up. Unknown number, 1 new message. His chest tightened. He hesitated before tapping it open. "You won this round, kid, but the system doesn't forget." Marcus's breath caught. His thumb hovered over the reply button, but his mind was racing. Who sent this? Was it Callahan? Wallace? Someone else? His pulse pounded. He forced himself to breathe. They wanted him scared. They wanted him to back down. But they had already made one mistake. They underestimated him once. And that That was never happening again. He deleted the message. Then he opened his laptop. If the system didn't forget, neither would he. The real fight was just beginning. Marcus won today, but how many kids don't get the chance to fight back? If you believe in justice, hit subscribe now. More stories like this need to be told.